The air inside the
Seriously,
Maricopa County
watch
Superior
these
Court felt dry
whispers,
as bone,
buddies.
like it hadn't held a breath of mercy in years. Wooden benches groaned under the weight of silent bodies. No one shifted. No one blinked. The old ceiling fan spun slowly overhead, slicing the heat into stillness. Judge Gregory Vale leaned forward, heavy in his black robe, hands folded like he was already tired of the day. His voice rolled out, low and smooth, practiced, with a hint of theatre. He looked down at Nurse Maya Rivera as if she were a child trying to explain a broken vase. "You're telling this court that Mr. Dunnington, a man who funds half the retirement wings in this county, walked into a hospital room and struck an elderly man in your care?" He didn't wait for her to answer. His lip curled slightly, enough to make a woman's stomach twist. Maya sat upright at the witness stand. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, knuckles white. Her voice was steady, but the tremble underneath gave her away. "Yes, Your Honor, I saw it with my own eyes. He didn't just strike him, he taunted him. I called him by name as if it meant something." Gasps almost escaped the room, but no one dared make a sound. Dunnington didn't flinch. He sat beside his lawyer, polished and calm, like someone who had never been told no in his life. The judge narrowed his eyes. "Miss Rivera, how long have you worked as a nurse?" "7 years, Your Honor." "Any complaints on your record?" "And yet you expect us to believe that a respected member of this city's philanthropic leadership would do something so irrational in a public place with witnesses?" He let the word hang like bait in the sun. "There were witnesses, but none of them will speak. They're afraid." He raised his eyebrows. "Afraid of what?" "Of him, of what happens when you speak against power in this town." A murmur began to rise, but Judge Vale cut it off with a sharp crack of his gavel. "That's enough." He turned to the gallery. "I will remind everyone that this is a court of law, not a stage for rumors." He looked back at Maya, and something in his face hardened. The look of a man who had already made his decision. "Miss Rivera, I find your account not only lacking in evidence but deeply irresponsible. Your accusations have no merit, no corroboration, and frankly, no place in this courtroom." Maya opened her mouth, but the words caught behind her teeth. Her eyes burned, but she didn't let them fall. The judge turned to his clerk. "Prepare the dismissal order. The case will be closed on lack of grounds and absence of reliable testimony." A heavy stillness fell over the room. People sat frozen, like waiting for a thunderclap that never came. The clerk shuffled papers. Dunnington glanced at his watch. Judge Vale reached for the gavel. His fingers brushed the wood. Then came a sound. A chair scraped, slow and steady, from the back row. An old man stood up. Tall, sun-worn, with grey hair swept back and boots that had seen desert miles. He didn't rush. He didn't look around for approval. His voice carried low but clear through the hushed room. "Do you remember your oath?" The words didn't shout. They struck. Judge Vale's hand stopped mid-air. His gaze snapped toward the speaker. So did everyone else's. 5 words. The whole courtroom stopped breathing. The clerk dropped a pen. Maya turned, confused. Dunnington's smirk faltered for the first time. The judge blinked slowly, as if dragging up something buried deep. His jaw moved, but no sound came. The old man took a step forward, one boot, then the next. No one stopped him. "You wore that robe for 30 years, Gregory. You swore it meant something. Do you remember what you told us when you first took that bench?" Vale looked stunned, not angry like he'd seen a ghost. Chuck Norris stood steady, eyes fixed on the man behind the bench. His voice was calm, like recalling a story too painful to forget. "You said justice wasn't just law. It was the weight of every silent man who never got to speak. You said a courtroom should be the safest room in town." The judge swallowed. His hand pulled back from the gavel like it was hot. Chuck's voice dropped lower, but its weight filled the chamber. "So I'm asking you, right now, do you remember your oath?" The silence broke open, wide and raw. A man in the second row stood up, shoulders trembling, then another. A nurse from the back, still in scrubs. A janitor. A retired firefighter. One by one, they rose, like they'd been waiting for permission to stop being afraid. Maya looked around, tears catching on her lashes. Judge Vale sat still, jaw tight. The robe on his shoulders suddenly looked too heavy. The courtroom had changed, not with noise but with presence, with eyes that no longer looked down. Chuck didn't say another word. He didn't need to. The judge slowly leaned back in his chair, his fingers laced together. A long breath left his lungs. "We'll take a recess," he said, voice no longer smooth. He looked down, away from Chuck, away from everyone. "Clerk, hold the dismissal." Then he stood, robe dragging behind him, and left the bench without a word. The gavel never fell. Maya Rivera never planned to be anything but a nurse. She didn't dream of medals or recognition. She just wanted to help people who couldn't help themselves. She grew up in a quiet house in Tucson. Her mother worked night shifts at a diner, and her grandmother used to say kindness was the strongest kind of courage. Maya believed that. When she first stepped into a hospital as a student, she felt like she belonged. The smell of antiseptic, the beep of monitors, the hum of machines. It felt like a place where things mattered. She learned early that not all victories came with applause. Sometimes it was holding a hand at 3 in the morning. Sometimes it was cleaning up messes no one else wanted to notice. Patients trusted her. Families thanked her. Most of the time, it was just quiet work. But it made her feel steady, like she was doing something real. The man she stood up for was named Mr. Alvarez, 90 years old, a former teacher who still remembered poetry from memory and called every nurse by name. He had bruises the morning Maya noticed him flinch. She asked what happened. He just looked away and said the boy didn't mean it. The boy was not a boy. He was a grown man with a rich last name and friends in high places. He visited sometimes, was always late, and was never kind. She saw it happen on a rainy Thursday, saw the man raise his hand, saw Mr. Alvarez try to smile through it. That smile broke her. She wrote the report, filed it the right way, told her supervisor. The next day, she was told not to come in. No investigation, no questions, just a call from HR and a warning to keep her mouth shut. They told her it was a misunderstanding, that families had rights too, that sometimes old men bruise easily. She didn't sleep that night, or the one after. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mr. Alvarez gripping the sheets, trying not to make a sound. Her mother told her to let it go. Her cousin, who worked in real estate, said nothing good comes from fighting rich men in Phoenix. But Maya couldn't walk away. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about pride. It was about a man who couldn't stand on his own, and the silence that swallowed his pain. She tried every path she could. Called ombudsman, reached out to elder care advocates. Most listened to, none acted. Eventually, someone whispered that the man she accused was a donor to several state campaigns, that his father played golf with judges. The care facility was part of a protected network. Maya's rent went up, her license came under review for a minor paperwork error, her car insurance was suddenly cancelled. Things got harder in quiet ways. She started cleaning houses 3 days a week, took night shifts at a mobile clinic, cut back on groceries. Still, she kept going. When she filed suit, she knew it wouldn't end well. Everyone told her she'd lose, that the courtroom wasn't built for women like her to win. But she wasn't fighting to win. She was fighting so someone would hear the truth, even if it broke her. Sometimes, on the long walks home, she'd wonder if she'd made a mistake. If it was worth the job, the sleepless nights, the threat letters shoved under her door. Then she'd remember Mr. Alvarez saying thank you. Soft, barely a whisper, but real. That was the moment that carried her. That was the reason she kept showing up, even when the courtroom looked like a stage already scripted against her. When she sat on that witness stand, her hands shook, not from fear of the man across the room, but I know how many people would suffer if she stayed quiet. She never thought she'd be alone up there, never imagined the people who once called her brave would look the other way, but she also never thought anyone would stand up for her. So when the old man in the courtroom rose and asked if the judge remembered his oath, something deep inside her steadied. Because in that moment, she remembered hers too. It was printed on the back of her nursing badge, "Do no harm," but also, "Stop the harm when no one else will." That was her promise. Not just to patients, to herself. Chuck Norris sat 3 rows from the back, just close enough to see the judge's face and just far enough to be forgotten. His hat, a plain, weathered canvas thing, sat low over his brow. He kept his hands folded in front of him, thumb tracing the edge of his old watch out of habit. Most folks in the room didn't look twice at him, just another quiet man with tired eyes and sun-worn skin. That was fine by him. He had come early, watched the bailiff unlock the doors, sat down before the hum of whispers filled the space. He always liked to get a read on the room before the noise started. Courtrooms never changed much, different buildings, same walls, same smell of stale coffee and nervous sweat. Chuck wasn't there by accident. A friend from the service, a guy named Hollis, had called him a few nights back, said there was a woman standing up for someone who couldn't speak, and the whole system was set to grind her down. He didn't ask for details, just asked where and when. Hollis said, "She's the real thing, Chuck. Not loud, not looking for trouble. She just didn't look away." That stuck with him. Too many folks spent their lives doing just that, looking away. Chuck had seen his share of courts and conflict, served in places where justice was a word printed on pamphlets no one read. He learned early how the world worked, who it does protect, who forgot. He didn't come looking for a fight. He came to witness. There was power in simply being present. So when the hearing began, he watched, listened closely, not just to what was said, but also to what wasn't. He saw how Maya sat, straight, quiet, with that still kind of strength that didn't need to prove itself. Her voice didn't rise, her hands didn't shake until after she finished. Chuck could tell she was scared, but she didn't let fear sit in the driver's seat. That mattered more than most folks realized. The man she accused looked like someone used to getting his way. Slick suit, empty eyes. Chuck had seen men like that before. He could smell the entitlement on them. The judge didn't hide his lean. You could hear it in his tone, hear how quick he was to discredit her. Chuck didn't flinch, but he noted every word. When the dismissal was ordered, something moved behind his ribs, a slow, cold turn. He didn't plan to speak, not at first, but he watched the air go out of the room like someone had cracked a vacuum seal, watched Maya's face hold steady while the ground slipped under her. That's when he felt it. The weight of silence is getting too heavy. Chuck believed in timing, believed there were moments you couldn't take back. When truth knocked, and all that mattered was if you answered. He looked around the gallery. No one else would move, not because they didn't care, because they'd been taught it wouldn't matter. That's what power did, it taught people not to try. So he stood. Not fast, not slow, just enough to be seen. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to threaten, he just asked a question. "Do you remember your oath?" 5 words, that's all, but they were heavy with something the judge couldn't brush off. He didn't say them to shame, he told them to remind. Chuck knew what an oath meant. He took one once too, and it still meant something, even now. So he waited. Watched the shift happen, not in the judge's eyes, but in the room. People remembered they weren't alone. And Maya? She looked around like maybe, for the first time in a long while, She wasn't standing by herself. That was enough. Chuck didn't need to be the story. He just needed to make space for it to keep going. The courtroom felt colder when they came back from recess. The lights hadn't changed, but something in the air had. Even Maya could feel it, like someone had turned the floor a few degrees off balance. Judge Vale returned to the bench without looking at her. His face was calm and polished. Whatever moment had shaken him before was now sealed behind his usual mask. He shuffled through papers like he was bored, cleared his throat, then looked up and spoke her name, soft and flat, like reading it off a chart. Mr. Rivera, before we proceed, this court needs to explore concerns that have been raised regarding your emotional stability. The attorney stood halfway, startled, but Vale raised a hand without turning. Let me finish, counselor. Maya froze. Her breath caught before she could pull it back in. Emotional stability. The words sank like stone. Judge Vale continued, slow and deliberate. It has come to the court's attention that Miss Rivera took an extended leave of absence last year following the passing of a family member. Her behavior since then, according to several reports, has raised concern. There were no reports, no official record of instability, just whispers, murmurs, slanted eyebrows that no one could prove. Maya's lawyer spoke up, careful but firm. Your Honor, that has no relevance to the facts of this case. She has no clinical diagnosis, no disciplinary action, no history of... Vale waved a hand again. Thank you, counselor. The court will decide what is relevant. He leaned forward, eyes narrow. Miss Rivera, have you ever received counseling or therapy? Maya looked at him, trying to steady herself. Her voice came low, caught in her throat. Yes, after my grandmother passed. I saw someone in grief. Vale nodded, as if she'd confirmed something. And did that counselor at any point suggest that your perceptions may be influenced by emotional trauma? She stared at him, unable to speak. Her lawyer objected, voice rising. But the judge ignored him again. I'm simply asking if she's capable of distinguishing reality from projection. That matters here. Maya clenched her fists in her lap. She could feel eyes on her from every direction, watching, measuring. No one stood up. No one said a word. Judge Vale smiled faintly, like the game was already won. Let the record show that the witness admits to receiving mental health treatment within the last calendar year. Her lawyer tried again. Your Honor, this is character assassination. We have video logs, internal reports and statements that... And none of them proves that her interpretation of events is grounded in fact. Vale's voice never rose. That was the most dangerous thing about it. He didn't need to shout. He just kept tilting the scale, one grain at a time. Maya blinked fast, her eyes burning. She wasn't crying yet, but it was coming, the kind you try to hold back until you're somewhere no one can see. The judge shifted to a new line of attack. Let's talk about your employment, Miss Rivera. Why do you think the hospital let you go? She swallowed. As I reported something they didn't want to deal with. Or is it possible they questioned your judgment? Perhaps found your account inconsistent with known facts? She didn't answer right away, not because she didn't have one, but because she could feel the trap. He kept going. Is it possible you misread the situation? Perhaps your memory filled in gaps that weren't really there. She looked at the jury box. Empty. This wasn't a jury trial. Just one man deciding everything. The judge leaned back, folding his arms. No more questions. Maya's attorney stood, voice tight. I'd like to redirect, Your Honor. Make it brief. He walked slowly toward Maya, gentle in his tone. Maya, how many years have you worked with patients? 7. How many times have you filed a report like this? Only once, this one. Why? Because what I saw wasn't normal. It wasn't something I could look away from. And were you afraid of the consequences? Yeah. Then why do it? She looked straight ahead. Not at the judge, not in the crowd. Because he couldn't defend himself and I could. A silence hung, heavier than before, but still no one moved. Judge Vale sat forward. That will be all. I'll be reviewing final motions this afternoon. This court is adjourned until further notice.
He banged the gavel like it was routine. Nothing in his face showed the storm he'd just caused. Maya stood slowly. Her legs felt stiff. Her chest hurt. The room emptied in near silence. No one spoke to her. No one dared. She gathered her bag and turned toward the door. Her attorney touched her shoulder but said nothing. She had given everything she had. Her job, her name, her peace. And still it felt like she was losing. But just as she reached the aisle, she heard the sound of a chair scraping back. Slow, firm, as she turned and saw him, the man in the hat, rising from his seat like time itself had paused to listen. And then, 5 words. Do you remember your oath? The words floated in the still air and the whole room froze. The sound of the gavel echoed like a closing door. Judge Vale didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His tone was final, clipped, as if everything that needed to be said had already been said, as if the rest was noise. Maya sat still in the witness chair. Her eyes were wide but blank, like her spirit had stepped back, waiting to see if the world would let her fall. Her attorney leaned toward her and whispered something. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Judge Vale adjusted his robe. He reached for the folder in front of him, flipping pages like they were routine reports. He didn't look up. Dismissed, on lack of grounds and insufficient reliability of testimony. His words cut like a knife, the kind that once severed can't be tied back clean. The clerk reached for the stamp. Her fingers moved slowly, almost reluctantly. In the gallery, no one shifted, no one coughed, no one breathed louder than a whisper. Maya closed her eyes for a moment. Just one blink too long. When they opened again, they were damp. Her hands were in her lap, fingers curled in tight. Her jaw clenched like she was holding in the last thing she still owned. Judge Vale lifted the gavel. His hand paused in the air, maybe for half a second, maybe less, long enough to wonder if he was waiting for something to stop him. Nothing came. Then, a sound. Soft, low. A wooden bench groaned as someone stood. It came from the back of the room. Slow, measured, like an old clock striking its hour without fanfare. Maya turned, slightly, unsure if she heard right. Her lawyer stopped speaking mid-sentence. Even the judge froze, wrist still lifted. A man stood near the last row. His hat shadowed his eyes. He didn't look left or right. He just stepped forward. The floor creaked once beneath his boots. One step, then another. Not a single voice rose to meet him, not a guard, not the bailiff. No one dared interrupt. He walked steadily, as if drawn by something older than rules. 3 more steps. Then he stopped. Not at the front, not on center stage, just close enough to be heard. Chuck Norris raised his head. His voice didn't need to carry far. Do you remember your oath? 5 words. That was all. But they rang louder than the gavel ever could. The judge didn't move, his hand still hovering, stayed in place like he forgot how to lower it. Maya's breath caught. The sound of it was so soft, but in that still room, it filled the air. People turned slowly, like waking from a long sleep. No one else spoke. Time didn't stop, but it shifted, paused, like even the clock on the wall had to catch up. The silence stretched deep and wide. Then Judge Vale lowered his hand, not to the gavel, to the bench. He folded his fingers slowly. His eyes stayed on Chuck, but his mouth didn't open. Something in his face had changed. Not fear, not anger, just memory. The room held still, and for the first time that day, Maya didn't feel alone. Chuck took another step toward the front. Not hurried, not slow, just sure. The sound of his boots on the tile was the only thing moving. Even the clerk stopped typing. The whole room leaned into the stillness, unsure if they were watching a man interrupt court or restore something older than law. He came to a stop just inside the boundary where the public seats ended, close enough to look Judge Vale in the eye, far enough to make the moment breathe. The judge sat upright, silent. His fingers were still folded together on the bench, but his jaw had tightened. He didn't speak. Not yet. Chuck stood there, quiet, letting the silence do its work, letting it settle on every shoulder. Then, with the same calm voice, he said it again. Do you remember your oath? The question didn't land like an accusation. It landed like a memory, heavy but familiar. And for a second, something behind the judge's eyes moved. Chuck reached into the inside pocket of his coat. His hands didn't shake. There was no need to rush. He pulled out a single folded sheet of paper, carefully opened it, held it in both hands. This is yours, Gregory. You said it 24 years ago when you were appointed to this bench. The judge blinked. His eyes dropped, just for a moment, to the paper. Chuck looked down at the page, then began to read. I swore to serve this court with humility, courage, and the full weight of the truth. I vowed never to let influence outweigh conscience, and to remember always that justice isn't something you claim. It's something you earn every time a powerless voice enters this room. Chuck paused, let the words hang. You said that in front of your wife, your children. I remember because I was there. The judge's throat moved. No one else in the room dared to shift. You stood at this very bench and you said that a judge must walk with both eyes open. One of the laws, and one of the people it's meant to protect. Chuck folded the paper slowly. His voice softened. That oath meant something once. Not to the cameras, not to the donors, to you. The silence deepened. Even the lights seemed to dim, like they didn't want to interrupt. This woman stood here, alone, telling the truth when it would have been easier to stay quiet. And all she got for it was doubt. Chuck took one step closer, voice steady as stone. You don't have to like her, you don't even have to believe her yet, but your oath doesn't give you the right to dismiss her before the truths had a chance to breathe. The judge's fingers curled tighter on the bench. He still hadn't spoken. Chuck looked around the room. Faces stared back, some ashamed, some wide-eyed. Most looked like they hadn't heard a moment this honest in years. He turned back to the bench. You can wear that robe and still forget who you are, but not today. Not with this many eyes watching, not with that paper in your name. Chuck stepped back. Just one step, but it felt like a turning point. He didn't sit. He didn't leave. He just stood there, a still and solid, like a witness who had done his part. The judge sat silent for a long time, then another. He didn't touch the gavel, didn't reach for his notes. His eyes lowered to the paper still in Chuck's hands, then to Maya, who hadn't moved since Chuck began speaking. And for the first time since the hearing started, the balance of power felt like it shifted. Not with force, not with anger, but with truth. Judge Vale stared at the paper in Chuck's hand. His eyes didn't blink, his jaw tightened, loosened, then tightened again. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough, the kind of voice that hadn't spoken the truth in a long time. I never meant for it to be like this. He tried to sit up straighter, but it didn't help. The weight wasn't on his shoulders, it was in his chest. The oath had been just words for years, a line on a plaque, something polished, recited, forgotten. Now it sat there in the open, alive again, and it burned. Chuck stepped aside, not saying another word. He didn't look smug. He didn't look satisfied. He just moved quietly like his part was done. The judge looked down at the bench in front of him. His hands hovered over the file, then stopped. He couldn't meet Maya's eyes. The courtroom waited, holding its breath. No one whispered. No one fidgeted. It felt like watching a man crumble without a single piece falling to the floor. Vale cleared his throat, but the sound cracked. He tried again. It cracked again. He touched the paper Chuck had unfolded. His fingers paused on the crease. His mouth opened, but the words never found their shape. He read the lines again. Not out loud, just with his eyes, slower this time. And he whispered something only the clerk could hear. The clerk looked up, stunned. The judge nodded once, with emotion that felt too small for what it meant. Gregory Vale stood. He didn't slam the gavel. He didn't say the court adjourned. He didn't even look at the man he had tried to defend. He stepped away from the bench. Each step sounded softer than the last, like the ground itself was pulling back. Maya watched him walk. She didn't move. She didn't speak. Her face was unreadable, caught somewhere between disbelief and something deeper. When he reached the small side door, Vale stopped. He looked back, not at Chuck, not at the gallery, just at the empty chair he'd left behind. That's where the crack showed. Not on his face, not in his voice, but in the way his shoulders finally dropped, like a man realizing the robe on his back no longer fit. He opened the door and left. No bang, no speech, just absence. And in that stillness, something in the room exhaled. The building emptied slowly after Judge Vale stepped down. People moved like they weren't sure if they were allowed to speak yet. Even outside on the courthouse steps, the air stayed strangely quiet. Maya didn't leave right away. She sat for a while on one of the benches near the hall. Her attorney stayed nearby but didn't say much. He seemed to understand that the silence was part of the healing. When she finally walked out, the sun was low and soft, not blinding, just enough to warm her face. She looked up at the sky like she hadn't in a while. The news ran headlines about the sudden resignation of a sitting judge. They mentioned inconsistencies, a review of prior cases, and a formal ethics inquiry. But they never mentioned the man in the hat. Still, people talked. They didn't say his name, but they described him, the way he stood, the way he spoke, the way everything stopped after 5 quiet words. At the hospital, Maya's badge was waiting for her. No apology, no ceremony, just the beep at the security door, the way it used to sound when her shift began. The head nurse hugged her in the hallway without a word. A few others followed, not everyone, but enough. Some of the staff who once avoided eye contact now held it longer. They asked questions about the case in a way that felt real, not like gossip. Maybe they were trying to understand what they had missed. Mr. Alvarez was moved to a different facility, a better one. He sent her a letter in shaky handwriting, thanking her for seeing him when no one else did. 1 month later, a quiet bill was introduced to the state legislature. It didn't carry a dramatic title, just a number and a mission. Stronger protections for elder care workers, clear reporting standards, consequences for retaliation. The proposal didn't pass overnight. It didn't light up headlines, but it started conversations in staff meetings and policy rooms where silence had lived for too long. Maya didn't speak at rallies. She didn't seek interviews. She just kept showing up to work. Shift after shift, patient after patient. But people noticed the way she walked now, a little taller, like something inside her had stopped apologizing for being right. Sometimes someone would leave a note in the break room, "Thank you for standing up. My mom is in care too." Or, You reminded me of why I started this job in the first place. And he didn't sign their names, but that wasn't the point. Change didn't come like a storm. It came like a slow tide. A few more staff members speaking up when something felt off, a few more families are asking harder questions, a few more managers are taking complaints seriously. Chuck was never seen at the hospital, never wrote an op-ed or appeared on any panel, but his presence lingered in the way people began to pause before brushing things aside. One morning, Maya walked past a small conference room where new hires were being trained. On the whiteboard was a quote in dry erase marker. "Justice is earned every time a powerless voice enters the room." She stopped for a second, her throat tightened. The words were almost identical to the oath Chuck had read in court. She didn't say anything, just kept walking. There were still bad days, still moments where she doubted whether anything had really changed, but those moments didn't last as long as they used to. Because now, when she looked around, she wasn't the only one watching. In small towns across the country, other nurses started sharing their stories. Some didn't have happy endings, but they told them anyway. And in a courtroom in Phoenix, an empty chair sat behind the bench. The nameplate was gone. But the memory stayed, not of failure, but of a line that someone finally refused to cross.
Justice didn't come loud that day. It came still, and that stillness spread. The bench sat under a wide oak tree near the north end of the park. It wasn't marked or special, just old wood, weathered grey, a little uneven on one side. Chuck sat there like he belonged in the quiet, a worn paperback in his hands, a thermos beside him. Nothing loud, nothing rushed. Maya saw him from a distance and slowed her steps. She didn't know why she had come looking, only that she'd hoped she might find him. The light filtered through the leaves in slow, golden patches. A breeze passed, soft enough to move the edge of her coat. Chuck didn't look up right away. He finished his page, turned it gently, then raised his eyes and gave a small nod, like he had been expecting her after all. She smiled, quiet and real, sat down next to him without asking. They sat like that for a moment, the two of them facing the little walking path where joggers passed, too caught in their own rhythm to notice anything else. "Thank you," she said, finally. He glanced at her. Not dismissive, just calm. For what? For standing up when no one else did, for stopping everything. He looked back at the trees across the lawn. Birds moved through the branches like they had their own story to tell. "I didn't stop it," he said. "You did." She folded her hands in her lap, thought about arguing, then didn't. "You reminded me I wasn't crazy. That's what I saw. Was real." Chuck nodded once. "That matters. But you still had to speak it, still had to live with it when the room turned quiet. That part's never easy." Maya let the words settle. She looked at the dirt path. A dog ran past with its leash trailing behind. "I kept waiting for someone else to step in," she said, "but they all looked the other way." He tilted his head. "Sometimes they do. Sometimes they're just waiting for someone to show them it's possible not to." She looked at him. His face didn't hold judgment, just understanding. "Why did you come that day?" she asked. He took a slow breath, set the book face down on his knee. "An old friend called, told me someone was standing alone in front of something heavy, said she needed a witness, not a savior, just have someone see it and not blink." Maya looked away for a moment, her eyes damp. She didn't wipe them, just let them be. "It meant more than you know," she said. Chuck gave a small shrug. "You didn't need saving. You were already telling the truth. Sometimes all a person needs is to know they're not the only one awake in the room." The breeze picked up again. The oak leaves rustled like slow applause. "I don't feel brave," she said. He smiled, almost to himself. Brave never feels like the movies. Most of the time it just feels like not leaving when everything in you says run. She nodded, sat with that for a while. Do you ever get tired of carrying all this? He picked up his thermos and unscrewed the cap, poured a bit into the lid and handed it to her. Coffee still warm. Sometimes, he said, but then I see someone like you and I remember why it matters. She took the coffee, both hands around it. It tasted strong. No sugar. She didn't mind. They sat together until the shadows stretched across the grass. No rush, no need to fill the space. When she finally stood to leave, she turned to him. You changed everything, she said. He shook his head gently. No. You reminded them how to listen. She held his eyes for a moment longer, then walked away, quiet and steady. Chuck watched her go, then picked up his book, turned the page, and kept reading. The room was brighter than most hospital classrooms. Sunlight poured through the wide windows, warming the desks where young nurses sat with open notebooks and alert eyes. Maya stood at the front, hands folded loosely, her voice calm and steady. She no longer wore scrubs. Today it was a soft blue blouse and black pants, simple and neat. But the stethoscope still hung from her bag like a piece of her past she had no interest in letting go. This was her seminar, Advocacy in Practice, a workshop designed not from textbooks but from memory, from lived experience. From a moment in court when everything could have broken but didn't. She told the story carefully, never for drama, just the truth. The long silence, the fear, the 5 words that stopped time. The students listened. Most are in their 20s, some have already worn a bit from long shifts and harder days. A few scribbled notes, a few just stared at her, wide-eyed and still. She didn't name names, not the judge, not the man who hurt her patient, but she described what it felt like to stand in front of power and not flinch, what it meant to protect someone who had no voice left. Some nodded, some looked uncomfortable. That was good. Discomfort meant they were learning something real. She ended the session the same way she always did. Every nurse carries more than charts and tools. We carry silence. We carry trust. Sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do is break that silence to protect the trust. Do it anyway. The room stayed quiet for a breath. Then the shuffle of bags and soft talk began as the students stood to leave. Maya packed her notes slowly. She liked to linger a moment, just in case someone had more to ask once the crowd thinned out. A young woman approached the desk, brown hair tied back, pressed collar, soft voice. Maya had noticed her earlier. She had barely spoken, but had listened with an intensity that didn't fade. She waited until the last of the others filed out before she spoke. I remember that courtroom, she said. Maya looked up, surprised. You were there? No, but I've seen it since. My father was the judge. Maya didn't move. She let the words settle. The girl didn't rush to explain. She didn't have to. The resemblance was in the eyes. Not sharp like veils, but thoughtful. Searching. I was in college then, the girl said. I didn't understand what had happened. I just knew my dad stopped being a judge. For a long time, he didn't talk about it. Now he teaches law students, but he starts his first lecture every year with the story of the day he failed. Maya blinked. Her breath caught for a moment, but she didn't look away. He says there was a man who reminded him of who he was, and a nurse who refused to lie. He says the robe didn't make him a judge, the truth did. Maya nodded slowly. Her voice came quietly. That took courage, telling the story like that. He lost a lot, the girl said, but I think he gained at least at home. Maya gave a small smile. What made you want to be a nurse? Because I saw what happened when someone stood up for someone else, and I thought, maybe I could do the same. They stood there for a while, no need to fill the silence. Before the girl left, she asked one more question. Do you remember what it felt like when you spoke and no one believed you? Maya paused. Yes, like trying to plant something in concrete, but later I found out the roots took hold anyway. The girl smiled. Not wide, just honest. Thank you for not walking away, she said. Maya nodded. And thank you for not forgetting. When the door closed behind her, Maya sat down for a moment at the edge of the desk. The sun had shifted. The light was lower now. She looked at the chairs, all empty, but the echoes stayed. Not loud, not sharp, just steady, like a seed-breaking stone. The garden sat at the edge of the neighborhood, tucked between a quiet street and a faded wooden fence. It wasn't big, just a few raised beds, some crooked rows of herbs, and a scatter of sunflowers that leaned toward the late afternoon sky. But to Chuck, it was enough. He knelt near the tomatoes, hands deep in the soil, pulling weeds with slow care. The dirt was warm. The smell of it always reminded him of something older than memory. Something steady. Birds called in the distance, and bees moved from one flower to the next without hurry. No one shouted, nothing rushed. It was the kind of place where silence wasn't empty. A boy wandered over from the sidewalk, maybe 10, maybe a little younger. He stood just past the edge of the plot, watching Chuck's hands move through the leaves. You're the one who made that judge quit? Chuck didn't look up right away. He finished pulling a small root, set it aside, and wiped his palms on the leg of his jeans. I was there, he said. That's all. The boy stepped closer, curious but cautious. He wore a baseball cap turned backward and carried a half-eaten apple in one hand. My cousin said you stared him down and made him walk off the bench. He said you could have taken him if he hadn't moved. Chuck smiled. It was small but kind. It wasn't a fight. Then what was it? Chuck sat back on his heels. The sun was low behind him now, casting long shadows over the soil. Sometimes it's not the man you have to face, it's the fear inside him. That's what makes people dangerous, not who they are, but what they're trying not to feel. The boy didn't answer right away. He kicked a pebble near his foot. So why didn't you yell? My dad says yelling makes people listen. Chuck shook his head gently. Yelling can make people stop, but it doesn't always make them hear. You speak quietly when you want the truth to last. The boy tilted his head, like that part didn't quite make sense yet, but he nodded anyway. Chuck turned back to the tomato plant, lifted a low-hanging stem and checked the soil beneath. A few green fruits had started to swell under the leaves. Takes time, he said, mostly to himself. Everything worth keeping does. He reached for a small wooden stake lying nearby. The letters were hand-painted, the edges a little worn. He pressed it gently into the dirt at the end of the row. The boy stepped closer and read the words aloud. A one seed at a time. Chuck stood and brushed off his hands. He looked out over the garden, not proud, just peaceful. That's how you fix things, he said. Not with noise, not all at once. You plant something, then you show up again the next day. The boy looked around the garden, the lettuce beds. The basil had gone to flower. A row of carrots is not quite ready yet. Doesn't look like much. Chuck nodded. Not today, but it will. He picked up a watering can and poured a soft stream over the base of the stake. The water darkened the soil around it, pulling the words into the earth. The boy watched in silence. You ever think, nothing's changing? He asked. Chuck didn't answer right away. He set the can down, walked to the edge of the garden, and pointed to the corner where wild vines had once taken over the fence. Last year, that spot was choked with weeds. Couldn't see the soil, couldn't breathe in there. And now we've got onions. The boy grinned. Chuck looked at him. There was something clear in the boy's eyes, that space between questions and belief. "You want to help tomorrow?" he asked. The boy nodded. "Yeah. I'll bring my cousin too." "Good. Bring gloves." The boy jogged off, apple still in hand, the cap bouncing on his head as he ran down the sidewalk. Chuck turned back to the garden. The breeze moved through the leaves like a breath. He knelt again, near the tomatoes, one hand on the stake, the other pressed gently into the soil. The sun dipped low, the day faded slowly. One seed at a time. That's how the world turns, quiet, patient, rooted in care. And sometimes, that's all it takes.